Hello, everyone. Today I want to talk about a topic that many people are curious about. Why are there so many denominations in Christianity? I'm sure some of you have had this question while attending church. Even within Presbyterianism alone, there's the Hapdong, Tonghap, and Kosan branches. Within the Holiness Church, there are separately the Yesung, Kisung, and Nazarene Holiness churches. And the same goes for Methodist and Baptist churches. You've probably thought at least once, why do they keep splitting like this? Can't they just get along together? I felt the same way. When I was young, I didn't think much about it and just attended the only church in our area. Later, I found out that the church I attended was the Presbyterian Church in Korea. But then I discovered that even within Presbyterianism, there were several different branches. At first, I really couldn't understand it. Why is it so complicated with all these divisions? But one spring day, a big tree I happened to look at completely changed my thinking. It was a large plane tree in the yard in front of my house. Usually I just passed by it without much thought, but that particular day, I looked at it carefully. Since spring had come, bright green buds were sprouting without exception at the ends of every branch of that big tree. What was amazing was that even the smallest twigs were all putting out leaves. At that moment, I suddenly realized something. How could this tree that had been dried up and frozen solid all winter come back to life so vibrantly? It was because of the roots underground that we couldn't see. In that soil where no one sees or acknowledges them, roots that have never seen sunlight push between stones to find water and nutrients and send them upward. And those nutrients travel through the large trunk to the big branches, from the big branches to the medium branches, from the medium branches to the small branches, endlessly dividing until they reach the very last small twigs, distributed evenly without favoring any one area. I thought the administrative system inside that tree was far more perfect than our country's administration. That's when I realized, it's natural for a healthy tree to branch out like this. Think about it. What would happen if a tree grew straight up like a bean sprout in just one stem? It wouldn't be able to bloom flowers or bear fruit. The reason trees spread their branches in all directions like this is to receive as much sunlight as possible. Branching out is actually what makes them healthy. Look at ginkgo trees, for example. They rarely get sick and some live for hundreds of years. But if you look closely at old trees, some parts do rot away. This happens when they've been drawing the same nutrients from the same place for too long and can no longer get sufficient supply. But the other living parts keep extending their fine roots to find new nutrients and sustain the entire tree. There's even a tree in America called the Methuselah tree. You can look it up on any search portal and you'll find it. This tree has lived for thousands of years. It's in an extremely dry, hot, and high location where even bacteria have trouble surviving, so it doesn't get diseases. Looking at trees like this taught me another lesson. This changed my thinking. Maybe the church being divided into various denominations is similar to this. Not division, but branching, a natural phenomenon of tree branches dividing. Now let's look back at history. What was it like before the Reformation in the old days? Only the Pope could interpret the Bible. Catholic priests all over the world couldn't interpret the Bible themselves. They could only read what the Vatican sent down each week, content that had been interpreted by the Pope. What kind of situation was this? If you only eat rice, you get beriberi, right? Similarly, receiving only one person's perspective, only one kind of interpretation continuously creates nutritional imbalance. Moreover, what would happen if that one pope interpreted things wrongly? The whole world would go down the wrong path. That's how papal infallibility came about, the idea that the pope is absolutely never wrong. Is that really true? But when we actually look at history, we see that there were many mistakes in the pope's biblical interpretations, and this led to corruption and moral decay entering the Roman Catholic Church. So in 1517, a man named Martin Luther arose. No, let's look at the Bible again. The goal isn't to see it differently from the Pope, but to see it more correctly, he said. The perspective emerged of seeing it according to its original recorded purpose, more rightly and correctly than the Pope. This was the beginning of the Reformation. Actually, 100 years before Luther, a man named Jan Hus from Bohemia had started this earlier. And after Luther came countless reformers like Calvin, Erasmus, and William Tyndale. And many scholars, like Theodore Beza, interpreted the Bible, but their interpretations weren't all identical. Some people drew certain nutrients from the Bible. Others derived different doctrines or truths, and so interpretations became quite diverse. As this happened, denominations and churches had no choice but to split. What happened as a result of the Reformation? First, the priesthood of all believers emerged, the idea that all believers could become priests, not just the Pope. Second, anyone could read and interpret the Bible. Anyone with some degree of insight could read the Bible, interpret it, and teach it. Third, people could pray directly to God without going through the Pope. All believers could approach God directly. Now, what would naturally happen? When many people read the Bible freely, slightly different interpretations emerge. Some people emphasize certain aspects, others emphasize different aspects, and so denominations naturally began to divide. It's now been about 500 years since the Reformation, and during those 500 years, we've truly had an era of free interpretation. Freedom to read the Bible, freedom to interpret the Bible was given. How should we view this? Looking at it positively, we came to taste the richness of the Bible from multiple angles. Just like how each branch of a big tree extends in different directions to receive more sunlight. If they compete healthfully with each other, saying, "Let's serve God better, let's serve our neighbors better," wouldn't that actually be good? It's much better than going astray by being narrow-minded. Of course, there are negative aspects too. Sometimes churches split not because of differences in biblical interpretation, but simply due to disputes over interests or church authority. This is truly unfortunate. These are problems that no one can deny. An even more serious problem is the emergence of heresies and cults. When you allow people to read and interpret the Bible freely, these side effects naturally occur. But what's interesting is that when you look at people who create these heresies, most of them haven't done proper theological study. Studying theology means going to seminary and examining how these issues were interpreted from at least before the Reformation, starting with the great scholars of the early church, like Chrysostom and other 2nd and 3rd century scholars, through the medieval period and into the Reformer era with Luther and Calvin. People who have properly studied theology like this don't create heresies because they understand the major flow of biblical interpretation. But people like Li Man-he of Shincheonji today and others who have created heretical cults mostly never went to seminary. They dug into the Bible by themselves at home, in their own caves. Continuing to study the Bible alone without theological training or common sense leads them to interpret things in strange directions. And when it becomes too strange, they become heresies and cults. The problem is that in democratic countries, there's no way to deal with these heresies and cults. And when these heretical and cult religions commit evil acts, the arrows of criticism unfortunately come back to Christianity as a whole. But even so, I think we need to have this perspective. Just because the church is divided into various denominations doesn't mean we need to view it negatively. Instead of seeing this as division, how about seeing it as branching, a natural phenomenon of tree branches dividing? Just as a healthy big tree has big branches and small branches that divide, the various denominations of Christianity, each emphasizing different aspects of the Bible while serving God, this too can be seen as a healthy form. That not everything visible is all there is also an important lesson. Just as there are roots underground that no one sees or acknowledges but work silently, equal to the above-ground parts of the tree, there are many people in the church who work silently in invisible parts. And we need a change of perspective, that branches dividing isn't necessarily all bad, but that through this branching, things can become healthier. Of course, there are things we must always be wary of, heresies that arise from improper, biblical interpretation and unnecessary divisions that occur purely from disputes over interests or church authority. These are definitely problematic. But denominations that arise from sound theological differences can actually be said to show the richness of Christianity. Some denominations emphasize God's love, others emphasize God's justice, others emphasize the work of the Holy Spirit, illuminating various aspects of the Bible in diverse ways. What's important is not hating and fighting each other, but having the attitude of healthy competition as branches from the same root, trying to better serve God and our neighbors. Just like all the branches of that big tree ultimately come from one root, receive the same nutrients, and all exist for the same purpose, to receive more sunlight and bear better fruit. What do you think? Shouldn't our perspective on viewing the church's various denominations change a little? That's all for today. I'll see you again next time. Thank you.